Welcome, everyone, to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling, and it is a great pleasure to welcome my special guest on this episode. You know him from UltimateClassicRock.com. You may also know him from being an author and the man behind this most excellent book called Journey Worlds Apart, which is what we're here to talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Nick DeRiso. How are you doing, Nick?
Very well. Thanks for having me on, Tim.
It's a pleasure to have you on. This is man, there's not I can't say enough about how I enjoyed reading through this journey book. But before we get into that, Nick, a little bit about yourself. I mean, you work at ultimateclassicrock.com, very popular website, very popular source for news about our favorite classic rock bands that we don't hear about anywhere else. How take me through, how did you end up there and how did you end up writing?
Well, I started out in the newspaper business when I was still in college. I studied journalism in school. That's really what I wanted to do, was write about music, in an entertainment section for a newspaper. And I did that until the industry started to change. I helped launch some websites for our company. By that point, I was writing for USA Today. You could kind of sense that things were moving in this online direction. So I got into the online side of things, first in the newspaper business and then separately, and found my way to Ultimate Classic Rock. I've been there for about 10 years now. I'm the assistant managing editor over there. We've got a great team of people who really just love music, and it's kind of a calling for us.
That's awesome. And I'm guessing most people who have watched my channel at one point or another have clicked on an Ultimate Classic Rock article. So yeah, when you reached out, I was like, oh, okay, Ultimate Classic Rock. That's very cool. So I'm gonna guess that you don't write a book like this, which I could see you've got the background there, which is awesome, um, without being a pretty sizable fan of Journey.
Well, it's a group that you can't necessarily avoid, even if you tried. They're such a part of the culture now in TV shows and movies that, even if you're not a fan of Journey, they're kind of in your life. But through my journeys in the newspaper business and into Ultimate Classic Rock, it really occurred to me that you might know these songs, but you might not know the stories. Uh, there's never been a truly comprehensive book at this, that was about this band, and all of its main characters, its offshoot groups, the albums and the tours. Just in talking to people who were even fans, who thought they were fans, didn't know that the band sort of grew out of Santana, and that Greg Raleigh, the original lead singer for Journey, was in Santana. They played at Woodstock. The original manager for Journey was a road manager for Santana. That really their entire arc begins in the 60s era of Woodstock, and when Santana came out of nowhere and suddenly became this phenomenon. And in time, it just seemed to me that there were untold stories here, that that we could put together something that would tell their story in a complete way. And so I think if you look at the book, uh, we're trying to create lots of entry points too. With a story that spans 50 years, the challenge was to make it user friendly. And having worked so long in the web side of things, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just page after page of copy, just gray column after gray columns, because there's so much to cover. It does begin with with Greg Raleigh in a helicopter rising up above Woodstock, and continues all the way up through last year.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to cover there. And so the idea was that you wanted to be able to move in and out of these eras. Um, there may be people that are interested in a very comprehensive way. There may be people that just want to read, say, about the Steve Perry years. And you can do that in this book. There is a continual timeline that you can follow, but the albums and the singles break out into their own individual items. There are lots of entry points with exclusive photos, exclusive artwork, along with more than 50 interviews. So, I would invite people to take a look at it because the format itself is a great selling point. If you're a comprehensive fan who wants to read and know everything that happened in this 50-year period, you can move through it in a linear way. If you're interested, well, how did they ever find Arnel Pineda? You can go directly to that, and it is presented in such a way that you can find it very quickly. And so, the idea of making a user-friendly book that could be of service both to people who are completists and those who really just want to say, well, I really like Frontiers, or I really like Escape, and I want to know more about those particular eras. Well, this book can do that for you.
I absolutely, you took the words out of my mouth. I really, really like the layout of it. You're right. There is a linear story that goes on, but there are individual reviews for each album.
Yeah.
I love what you did with the charts, as in here's when it entered the chart, here's where the singles entered the chart. I eat that stuff right up. And this was falling off the chart. Well, this single started up. Here's where the album took another, spike in sales. Here's where it dropped out altogether. I
Yeah.
find that stuff really fascinating. I absolutely love that you dug up the old ads, the old
Mm.
magazine ads for the albums, especially the early ones, which I'd never ever seen before,
Yeah.
because I am a massive fan of the first three Journey albums. I love the progressive era of Journey. I love all of it. I'm a huge Journey fan, and I have been for a long, long time.
Mm.
But I'm always steering people towards the pre-Perry era. I'm like, look, if you like prog rock, you might think you don't even like Journey. Check out
Yeah.
the first album, Look into the Future and Next, and you know, almost a completely different band, yet it's not. But yeah, I would look for things, things that I knew happened, and there they'd be. You know, here's Robert Fleischman's side of things. Here's Jeff Scott Soto's side of things. Uh, here's where the Storm comes into play. Here's where Bad English comes in, and um, so it's a fantastic layout. It's very easy to get into, and you're right. It's very easy to go to a specific spot in the catalog, in the career, in the time, the lifespan of the band, and find what it is you're looking for. And then hopefully you find that you want to go back and find out more. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. As a huge fan, I found things there were things, little factoids that I didn't know about before. So um and the narrative behind Journey is an interesting one, because I've always found it a bit of a dichotomy, because to me they've collectively produced some of the most positive, uplifting rock music ever, and yet behind the scenes there's always been some sort of tension. And like a lot of diehard Journey fans, and you referenced this in the book, I read that in-depth interview that Matthew Cardy did with Herbie Herbert some years ago. That was very eye-opening. You referenced that a lot. And just the specter that Steve Perry still has over this group, but then just the infighting and Neil Sean, Jonathan Cain. Um, I'll be honest, I went through a period where when all of that was going on in recent years, where I didn't listen to Journey. I didn't want to listen to them. I was so, dare
Yeah.
I say, bummed out by
Yeah.
reading all this stuff. And I know it's typical rock band stuff, but we don't really need, as fans, we think we want to know all that stuff, but I don't really think that we do, because it gets in the way sometimes of our enjoyment of the music. But it is nice to have it all out there, because as I'm reading through, I remember very specifically that period where Neil was all about, I'm going to rebuild Journey. I'm going to do this. They can't take the band away from me. I remember when he was on that particular uh, tack, I guess we'll say. Um, But you know, were there I guess my question is, you know, when it came to gathering the information, who did you speak to directly as members of the band and
Well,
along that?
I didn't talk to Steve Perry. He's the only principal person, but we
I would
did
think
talk
he'd
to
be a
him.
hard man to
Right.
locate.
And we did talk to him through interviews with UCR, but separately I did not speak with him. But I talked to Neil and Jonathan Kane and Greg Raleigh and Steve Smith and Steve Algeri and you mentioned Scott Soto and you know uh earlier members like Prairie Prince and a lot of collaborators. I find that some of the most interesting interviews that you can get are often not with the principal people. A lot of fans are going to say, well, did you talk to Neil? Well, yeah, I talked to Neil many times. But you will find out more sometimes talking to other people who worked with Neil, like John Waite, who I spoke with from Bad English, than you will from Neil himself. Um, as people go through their careers, in particular when you're Rock and Roll Hall of Famers, a lot of the interactions that you have with them become very polished. The answers are kind of repeated over and over again. They know what they're doing nowadays,
And they
and
get shorter every time, right?
sure, it's been 50 years, so
Yeah.
you're not necessarily going to get a lot of insight. Now, there are exceptions to that. Greg Raleigh is an incredibly giving interview subject. He loves to provide those kind of insights. He will speak with you from the heart. But for this book, talking to people who were in other bands with Neil, for instance, was far more illuminating. And the others as well. I'm not picking on him or
Yeah, no, I know
singling him out.
exactly what you mean. And because you're right, you do tend to get you get a very sanitized version of events, and eventually you get it's so shortened that they've answered your question, but they really haven't answered your question. But when you get to talk to people that they don't have anything to gain by coloring their
Right.
impression. So when you talk to the guys from Hardline, or like you said, Bad English, or The
Sure.
Storm,
Sure.
you're going to get what these guys were like.
Well, and it's a different experience for them too. You take a figure like Josh Ramos, who was in the Storm, and when he comes in, you've got Greg Raleigh is in the band, Steve Smith is in the band, and this is his big break. This is his moment. And so, for a person like Greg Raleigh or Steve Smith, who kind of moved into that band and then out of it, they had many experiences before that, many career highs. Many great things happened to them after that, including going into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Whereas for Josh, for a while, he was out of the business altogether, and then he ended up following Neil into Hardline when they restarted the band. So his perspective is very interesting because for him, it was this rocket ride moment in time, and all of it is very vivid. So those are interesting interviews because every moment of that for him was so much there was so much there for him. It was so vivid for him in ways that it wasn't necessarily for Greg Raleigh.
That's
And so that brings those things to life. I talked to Ron Wixow too, the drummer that followed Steve Smith in that band. Same thing for him. He's had a great career, but that was really a moment in time where he was a part of the creative process for one of the first times, writing songs. And they provide all kinds of great perspective to this.
yeah.
I also talked to producers. I interviewed the main album artist for Journey. We've got an entire appendix of exclusive images, not just of the album covers as they were presented, but his early sketches
Yeah,
and
those
submitted
are
images that no
priceless.
one's ever seen that
Yeah.
were not accepted when they went another way for their album. So, I mean, all these figures that sort of circled around them, video producers, people who were in their orbit and there provide such a great perspective as well. And so there was a lot of that. The very first interview I did was with Joel Selvin, who
Yep.
covered Journey from their second concert forward. And I wanted to start there because he had the full perspective of it, and he didn't have a point of view. In other words, he wasn't in the band for a few years and exited, or tried to keep it together like Neil did the whole time through a revolving door of other members. He was sort of outside of that and just covered it. And it gave me this great impact, sort of idea about the arc of it. It was very impactful. Spent probably 2.5 hours on the phone with him to start, and then called back and did additional ones. And so, despite the fact that I'd interviewed members of this band already, that really set the book on its way, because he was able to give me, some ideas about, from his point of view, how everything had gone. And so then you double back and you just begin interviewing everyone, and asking questions that were sparked by that conversation. And then as the book went on, I would go back because new things would pop up. You're not the only person that learned new things about Journey. I spent through the book, I spent 18 months working on this book. And, all of a sudden you're like, well, okay, I didn't know how far that went, or I wasn't even aware that had happened. 50 years is a long time.
Yeah,
And
there's a lot of episodes in there.
we go into all the side projects, every appearance on other people's records, every time they toured with someone else. And wow, there was just so much to be learned. It's very exciting, and in that way, because even someone like me who's been around this music for so long learned a lot. And I hope that that comes through in the book, the excitement of discovery, as we go on.
Yeah, there's so many great things. You bring up an excellent point though. When you have a band, well, I'm going to pick on the Storm. I was actually listening to that first album not too long ago. Um, that they actually fooled me because I remember late '91 listening to the radio, and I heard I've got a lot to learn about love, and I heard this voice and I go, well, that kind of sounds like Steve Perry. So
Yeah,
I thought, well, maybe he's finally put a second solo album out. But then I hear Greg Raleigh, and I
right.
was like, did Journey get back together? But that doesn't make any sense. Neil and Jonathan are still in bad English. I was
Yeah,
really confused by that. But
yeah.
but the Storm as a band, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's funny because Bad English in a way was 3/5 Journey,
Mm.
and so was the Storm on that first record. But so you've got Josh Ramos who comes in, great guitar player, and he's like, "Holy cow, we're opening for Bryan Adams." Meanwhile, Steve Smith and Ross Valerie are like, "Yeah, he opened for us."
Right.
It's just a different point of view,
Right.
and there were so many things that you went into so much detail, and I feel like I understand so much more about things that went on. Like, why did Steve Perry, why was he so set on getting rid of Ross and Steve during the making of Raised on Radio? I still don't quite understand what he thought the drummer and bass player were going to do or not do with the band. And then Herbie saying, this is so ridiculous. We're going to pay them as if they're still in the band. And
Yeah.
um, Herbie always seemed like the kind of guy that just told it as it was.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
did you ever get to interview Herbie before he passed
No, he
away?
passed away in the run up to this book. We were still in the outline process and getting, everything nailed down on it. But I was able to talk to Pat Morrow, who was his right hand man. Was there with him basically from the start. Uh, as Herbie was putting together the Golden Gate Rhythm section, which was a precursor band to Journey, he met Pat Morrow, and Pat became his right hand man and was throughout the entire time that he was with Journey. First as a drum tech for Ainsley Dunbar, then their road manager, and then later he took over and led their production company, which was lighting and trucks and just this incredible, subsidiary company that did everything in house in an era when people were still renting all that stuff out. Their setup and their business acumen was such that people began to use Journey's equipment when Journey wasn't on the road, beginning with the Who when they did their first farewell tour, and on and on. And so,
Very forward thinking.
yeah, by the time Pat Morrow retired the turn of the 2000s, Nocturne was the premier tour production company, and so his insight was invaluable, both to the scene there, as Journey came together, but then in the way that the business model that Herbie spearheaded became the industry standard. So he saw it in the same way that Herbie did, from the moment of it being just a seed that still needed to be germinated to the point where their production company lived longer than the band itself
Yeah,
did. They were just getting back together when Pat ended up they went through a merger and he retired.
yeah.
He is a man of great insight and great humor. Just as is Joel Selvin. They're two of the funniest people in the books. Very sharp comments, because they were there, and they saw it. So I was very happy to catch up with Pat. He's the next best thing to Herbie, and rest in peace. I wish I would have gotten the chance to, because one of the first people I reached out to was Matthew Carty. You mentioned him, because I knew that I wanted to extensively use the interview that Herbie did with him. It's not even available online anymore.
Yeah.
Matt has shut down the site that it was on, and it was just a legendary talk at the time.
Oh, I
And
read it with my mouth gaping open for most of it. I had
the insight and the
some of the
honesty.
things that Herbie was describing was like, I can't get my head around. A lot of it is just the behavior of people.
Right,
Like
right.
I can't, he had to deal with a lot.
So I got together with Matt and made sure that that was okay, because it was going to be a linchpin in getting Herbie's voice into the book. And with him gone, I didn't want his role to be diminished, simply because he wasn't here. So that became a big part of it, along with lots of other sources. But certainly, tip of the hat to Matthew Carty, who did a great interview, and it really his voice, thankfully, is in the book, and Matthew's a big part of that.
Yeah, as soon as you started lifting quotes from that interview, I could tell exactly where they came from because I read that so many times as a big fan. There were a lot of insights into the way that Herbie operated. For example, I think this is a good example as any. When people look back, they think that songs like Lights and Wheel in the Sky were big hits,
Yeah.
but they weren't. So the
Pretty
fact that
wrong.
Herbie would buy airtime so that people would hear these songs, what a brilliant, just that brilliant creative mind
Yeah.
to think, well, okay, there's got to be another way through. There's got to be another way around this.
Yeah. At that point in time, he got Journey songs uh, through partnerships played in shopping malls
Yeah,
and in airports, to the point where, and even in stadium PA systems at games, um, at sporting events, to the point where you thought, well, this is a huge hit. I'm hearing this everywhere.
yeah.
This song is everywhere I
Like,
go.
when you look back, how did this song not get hit the top 10? I've heard it a million times.
Sure, they had their first. They didn't have a single that reached the top 20 for far longer than anyone knows. It was
And
anybody
I'll
on it.
bet you if I was to ask the average Journey fan, what was Journey's first top 10 single, they'd probably say Love and Touch and Squeezing or Any Way You Want. And I said, no, it's Who's Crying Now?
Sure,
And
exactly.
I really like the fact that it's very near the beginning of the book. You talk about how Don't Stop Believing in its initial run. Yeah, it was a big hit, but it was not their biggest hit.
Yeah.
There, they were there were singles that outshined that song, but somehow it floated through all of these years, then all of a sudden exploded in like the mid 2000s.
Well, and Jonathan Cain, had some great insight into that when we talked. He said it's a song that gives people permission to dream. And, I think in its moment, it was part of a kind of a juggernaut where there was song after song after song coming out by Journey from their biggest album ever. And, quite frankly, that the sense of the ballads being so different at that time than anything Journey had done before carried something like Open Arms and Who's Crying Now higher up the charts, because of the novelty of this band doing these huge, power ballads. It was a new sound for them, and really kind of in sync with where rock was going at that time.
Yeah.
Uh, and it fit the times in a way that Don't Stop Believing didn't necessarily. So I'm with Jonathan, of course, on the idea about it giving people permission to dream. Its message is timeless, but there's also something quite unique in the way they put it together, and that's helped it stay relevant too, because it has all these little musical surprises in it that generation after generation of people get to discover anew.
It's a very unpop music like arrangement.
Yeah, they bury the chorus.
Yeah.
Neil actually plays the sound of the chorus to be on his guitar before get that guitar line
Yeah.
before they ever sing it.
And I took it for granted until I started reading things like that because I'd get to the point where I heard it so much. I mean, it used to be one of my all-time favorite songs, and I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying I've heard it so many times that you need people to remind you, do you realize they only say "Don't Stop Believing" a handful of times in this song? Do
Right.
you realize Steve Smith keeps a very unusual drum beat during this? It's the arrangement of it is really quite brilliant, the way they introduce the little hooky things that
Right.
everybody knows.
Yeah, and so that every few years a whole group of new people go, wow, this is an interesting song.
Yeah.
This is very different, uh, and they've gotten to do that because this song keeps showing up in unusual places, and so the legacy of Herbie Herbert lives on. You don't hear "Don't Stop Believing" on the radio very much. Where you hear it is everywhere else, just like it
Yeah.
used to be. You hear it in movies, you hear it on TV shows, you hear it in during sporting events. We live right across the street from a baseball field, and they probably played "Don't Stop Believing" this weekend during the last trio of games 6 times. You
Yeah.
just hear it floating through the air as you're going about your day. Uh, it's its resonance, I think, will continue because of that, because of that combination of message and musical construction. "Don't Stop Believing" is the most interesting hit they ever had. And, it makes sense if you think about it in that way that it would live on.
It's kind of neat how it, as the dust settles on a career, um, it kind of rose above as something like this isn't just another good Journey song. This is a really well written um, piece of music that's probably going to go on to become a standard. And um, yeah, it's very atypical of
Mhm.
any band's type of, I can't imagine someone going saying, "Hey, I got an idea for a song," and any producer, any music industry person would go, "You're going to wait until the very end to give the
Sure.
chorus? That's career suicide. You can't do
It
that."
was funny because Kane came in with that phrase. His father said it to him when his music career bombed out.
Yeah.
And he was, he at that point was working at selling stereos. He'd gotten two good shots at a solo career, and at one point ended up on American Bandstand with a low charting single that seemed like it might go somewhere. There's a really cool vintage interview with him, where Dick Clark's talking to him. But nothing came of the album, and he ended up getting dropped. He made another demo with an all-star cast. Steve Lukather was on the sessions. I mean, these were good shots, and
Yeah.
in particular in that time frame, the people who were involved and that the placement that he was getting, and it just didn't happen. And so he went back to work, and he's talking to his dad, and his dad, he wouldn't let him, give up on that dream. He said, I think that there's something there. And Kane scribbles this down. "Don't stop believing." That was his father's mantra. He kept saying to him, "Don't stop believing." So when he comes in with this, they're sitting there in the session, talking about, well, what other songs do we have? And he's got this scrap. This is meaningful to him. Not only is what's happening with him right now, the fulfillment of that, what his father's belief in him. He's finally in this band that's got this huge upside, and is, and he feels like is going to make his dreams finally come true. It's He's been holding on to it. I mean, this is special to him. Uh, and Steve Perry kept saying, "We're not going to do it yet." As they're working through the song, we're not going to say that yet. We're just you know, I want this song to have that kind of life, to it, where you're waiting in anticipation. And I mean, it took a lot for for Kane to let go of that, I'm sure, and
Yeah.
and indications, that I've gotten from him, when I spoke with him was that it was rough, that he was, but he felt like he was I think a junior member and couldn't really, sort of push too hard because this was his first album with them. And that worked in their favor because, he might have pushed harder and they might have, set the song aside. But in that moment, uh, he was willing to 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 let Steve Perry, have his way. And it was for the song's benefit for sure. And that's just speculation, but I'm saying, in that moment, there were a lot of there are all these cool coincidences that make this song work, and that's one of them. Steve Perry had been sitting in a hotel room, uh, in Detroit, trying to finish, a lyric, and and couldn't really find the right word to put in front of Detroit, and ended up with South Detroit, a place that doesn't exist. But Kane thought, well, this is a midnight train to nowhere. The place doesn't have to exist, right?
Yeah.
You have all of these neat little coincidences that go into that, and I think the fact that Kane was so new to their songwriting partnership worked in the favor of this song too, because when Perry wanted to wait to say "Don't Stop Believing," I think Kane, you know, he sort of, let Steve Perry take the lead on that. You've had some hits. You're
Yeah.
the front man, and it was to the song's benefit for sure.
It seems like, from all accounts, Steve Perry is uh could be a difficult individual to work with. On the Ross Valerie Steve Smith thing, and even butting heads with Neil and John. But it also seems like he had incredibly good musical instincts. And that's a good example, because he said this song is going to get played a lot. You want to hold on to that chorus until the end. And it's true. If they'd have put that chorus right at the beginning, it would have been just another good rock song. It wouldn't have had that little mini epic feel to it.
Right. Well, Steve Perry is an interesting character. They all are. I can tell you that one of the things that drew me to the subject was this cast of characters.
Yeah.
You've got Greg Raleigh, who's this soulful, savvy figure who led two bands to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Neil Schon, the child prodigy who fought and still fights to preserve their jam band roots. Uh, Kane, this taunting stoic type who endured this childhood tragedy when there was a fire at his school, but he writes with such empathy and romance. you know uh Even Arnel Pineda, a later period figure, but he's like the keeper of the flame, and perfectly happy to be in that position. He defers to Steve Perry in the same way that I felt like Kane did. um Even as he's become the longest standing frontman the band's ever had. He's got his rags to riches story, but just the way that he approaches his craft is so interesting to me. But obviously, for most people, Steve Perry is the center of this story, and he may be the most interesting of all. He certainly didn't come in with that level of perfectionism, but a lot of things changed as they got into the solo period era of the '80s, and
Yeah.
no one changed more than Steve Perry. He didn't want them to have solo projects. He
Yeah.
was very adamant about that, and in that way, and in that regard, so was Herbie Herbert. But Neil Schon wanted to do some outside stuff. Going back to what I said about wanting to preserve the jam band roots, he wanted to get in a situation where his solo stuff could be more open-ended because they were becoming more song focused rather. At the same time, Steve Smith wanted to do solo stuff too because he had an interest in jazz. He'd come out of the Berklee School of Music. He was the same way. These are becoming more song focused, projects. I'd like to start my solo career and open up a little bit into this interest I have into jazz. Steve Perry resisted. By the time he put out his solo record, Neil Schon had already done two.
But three technically, because he did the two with Jan Hammer, and then he did the one with Sammy Hagar.
And it just at some point it was due time.
Yeah.
And what
They were
happened?
never the same.
Well, and and I think Herbie knew it. You know, what happened with Steve Perry was he got to become the conductor of these sessions,
Yeah.
and all the pieces were put in place personally. You know, he picked the players, he picked the songs, he picked even the songwriting collaborators. Were all people that he went and found, or that he already had a comfortable relationship with. And when he came out of it, he'd had a big hit, a big solo hit, a big album hit, and he had an idea of now of what he wanted his music to be. You know, he had only been in band situations before then. He had never been in a true solo situation where he got to pick all the groceries and cook the meal.
Yeah,
And it changed Journey forever, you know.
it
And
did.
so
Yeah.
for the next period, there was a lot of trying to work through what the band could be, or even if it could be, with this new version of Steve Perry. And Steve Perry will tell you even now, you know, looking back, that he went too far in that direction with his perfectionism because he tore his own, self-image down.
Yeah.
Perfectionism can work both ways. You know, it can be something that creates a level of self-harm in your art too, and it did for him. Uh, he he starts coming in and out of the band. There's 10 years between albums. Uh, they finally split for good. And there's just this long period where he is changing again. You know, the controlling perfectionist finds love and peace of mind, but only after leaving. And
Yeah.
so there, for him, uh, it all feels bound up together. You know, a lot of people would have liked for them to get back together, in particular around the time of their Hall of Fame induction. But it seems for Steve Perry, he feels like an album like Traces is something that he can control, uh, you know, but not, but not in that same fashion. The people that I talked about that project with Tracy's, the people who worked with him describe a much different person as songwriter, uh, collaborators, performers on the album, the producer. He's a changed person now. But that doesn't mean that he wants to get into a situation, I don't believe, where he's not still the guy. I just think that
Yeah.
but he does a better job now by all accounts of taking in others ideas and I think he understood that what happened with Ross Valerie and Steve Smith was a mistake as well. I mean, he has looked back and said some very, kind things about the people that he worked with in Journey, and has said, for all intents and purposes, that he felt like some of the things that happened, he took responsibility for that. And for all intents and purposes, some of these things were mistakes, could have done it differently, that kind of terminology. I think there's a big arc for him, in the book. And I think he does end up in a much better place, not just personally, but in the way that you might think about Steve Perry if that controlling perfectionist era began to grate. I think that when his heart was broken by the loss of Kelly Nash, his really the love of his life, who was stricken by cancer, it I think it made him understand certain things about himself, because he had given himself to her in a way that he hadn't others, and he realized that life is short, and you know sometimes you've got to let go a little bit. I don't know if he'll be able to put another album together. There are more songs, but it almost feels like he's really enjoying not being Steve Perry more than more than others
Yeah.
might want him to be Steve Perry.
Well, going back to the solo projects thing, I mean, that's always been, I've always figured, like, why would you divert your attention from something that's working? And I think it was a quote from Herbie in the Behind the Music that, he's going to do, talking to Neil, he's going to do a solo album. It'll probably be successful, and you're going to rue the day that you started scratching these itches.
Yeah.
And now I have to wonder what would have happened if Steve had put up Street Talk and it wasn't a success, and he didn't have a big hit like he did with Oh Sherry, like would he have kind of said, well, all right, that didn't work. I got it out of my system. Let's do some more Journey albums, not one more album. And like you said, a 10-year hiatus where the public's appetite, I think, for Journey music was only getting bigger. Like Herbie Herbert said in that interview with Matthew McCarty, what I did for them in death is much more what I did for them in life. They sold way more albums.
Yeah.
That greatest hits album is an evergreen seller. So that people wanted to hear that music. And I think that to a lot of people, they only want to hear it from Steve Perry.
Yeah. Well, and you look at, today was the anniversary of Evolution going triple platinum. That happened in 1991.
Yeah.
So when people say, "Oh, well, the first three albums with Steve Perry were triple platinum albums," well, they are, but they weren't triple platinum in 1978,
Not in their
79,
original chart run.
91.
Not even I think the greatest hits album sold what, 2 or 3 million copies in the first couple of years it was out,
Yeah,
but it
and just
just
keep
kept
going.
selling.
Yeah, and so there's a longevity to that speaks to their craft, but also to, yeah, a lot of the groundwork that was done back then with people wanting to have these songs in their lives because they think they're all multi-platinum smash number one songs, and Journey never even had a number one
I
song.
mean, the work that they put in, and Herbie puts that greatest hits album out, and it just became something that will never be out of print, and there'll always be somebody new discovering that music. I just wish that there was more of an appreciation for, like, I'm really surprised, going back to the early stuff. I'm really surprised as big of a band as Journey were, and as much as that back catalog sold, that none of those first three albums ever certified. That surprises me after all this time.
Yeah, I think that they would do for a good remix. In particular, the first album with some cool extras. I just think that I think that sound is definitely something that could transfer to an era when Fish is playing, the Sphere to great, applause. But there's a there is definitely an archaic sound to the way that it's produced. I would love to see them pull that apart and kind of do what Stephen Wilson has done to a lot of these great old prog records, where
Yeah,
he brightens things up and separates it in a way that gives it a modern feel.
yeah.
Um, I don't I have no idea how. I mean, I do, but I don't know why Columbia paired Journey with Roy Haley from Simon and Garfunkel at that time. He was very enthusiastic. I know why. He wanted to be a part of it. He really believed in Journey, but I'm not sure he had all the tools that were needed to get a band like that to sound the way that they should. If you look at the leap in just the sound from Next, when they started working more on their own and then into the Roy Thomas Baker era, those sounds just leap out of the speakers in comparison to those first record in particular.
Yeah,
And
those first albums are pretty dense.
and just
I remember discovering them late. I mean, I remember discovering them in like '89, finding the first couple of albums on cassette, and I listened to those all the time because it was nobody else knows about this.
right.
The other thing that I remember finding that no, I had no idea what it was all about was Dream After Dream, and I'm glad
Yeah.
that you talked about that in the book briefly, because to this day that's never been domestically released on CD, and in
Right.
some cases it's not even considered part of the Journey catalog. Like
Yeah.
when you talk to did you find anything about that period, that because I always found that was really fascinating that they got this call to go work on this Japanese you know soundtrack or whatever, however that went.
Yeah, they were going to finish that tour in Japan, and the it was really something that came through management, and Neil Sean got excited about it. They figured that it would be easy enough to do, and that's a key part of it because they were going to finish in Japan, just stay over, and put this together. It seemed like it'd be a fun challenge. because you were writing music to scenes, and they had never done anything like that before. But what it turned into was something far more interesting, and I love talking to Greg Raleigh about it. It really gave him a chance to return to their early sound on what would end up being the very last record he was on. Most people think the last record was captured, but this actually came out later in the year, and it is very representative of the sound and feel of those early records
Yeah.
where there's a lot of expansive musical concepts happening, and really a chance to stretch out. And for somebody like Greg Raleigh, it was a great sort of feather in his cap at the end to get a chance to, because their songs had been even before Jonathan Cain showed up, their songs had been contracting and becoming more radio friendly. And this was an opportunity to sort of stretch out like they did, at first, and certainly like he did when he and Neil Sean were in Santana. And to me, uh, the best kind of send off that there could have been.
Yeah.
That was a big search, to find for a long time. Uh,
Yeah.
Bootlegs were incredibly expensive, and I ended up with like a second generation, cassette recording of it. Was my first experience with it. So yeah, it was very much one of the things that I wanted to make sure had its place in the book, because it's not just a one-off soundtrack. It's really the culmination of the Greg Raleigh era, and in the best possible way, where you get to hear him in full flight.
Yeah.
And they ended up issuing. There was one song that had lyrics on it called "Little Girl," and if you were paying close attention, it was the B side of "Open Arms" on the
Yeah. Yeah.
45.
That's the
But
one song people seem to
right,
know. It's the one that's on the box set. It's on Greatest Hits 2. But I
right,
always tell people, if you like the first three Journey albums, Dream After Dream is like if they were doing that, but they had Steve Perry. It's this wonderful
yeah.
combination. And if I were in a Journey cover band, I said I wouldn't care if people went and got drinks. I'd say we've got to do Destiny, because that is such an epic, epic song. I
Yeah,
remember getting the tape in like 1990 and just finding it in the rack. And I was like, is this the same Journey that I think it is? Because I've never heard tell of this. The album title isn't one word.
right.
It doesn't make any sense, but it's on Columbia. So I took a chance and I bought it. And as soon as Steve Perry's vocals came in on Destiny, I'm like, okay, so this is Journey, but what the heck is it? And it wasn't until the box set came out that I found out a little bit more about it. But yeah, you raise a good point, because I like the band that Journey evolved into. I like how they started, but for someone like Greg Raleigh, he was probably thinking, I don't want to do 3.5 minute songs. I want to do 7 minute songs that jam for a long time. So yeah, I never thought about that before, because I used to be really confused about where in the timeline it sat. But
Yeah.
yeah, that as actually is his farewell. And boy, does he ever go out with a bang.
Yeah, it's interesting because when Raleigh came back as a solo artist, he was doing songs. It sounded a lot like Journey. I think for him, uh, he had a sense, I think, and understood that wasn't in vogue at the time, that wasn't where rock was. The sound that they made with Santana, and even the sound that they made, into the Perry era with Journey, they were still doing some huge guitar explosion fade outs, and very long songs for where they were going, where they were headed. I just think for him, he said it. Greg Raleigh looked around in 1980. He had started two bands and gotten them both to stadium level fame. Had made plenty of money, uh, but he didn't have the other part in his life sorted out. He didn't have a family, and he will tell you that he's just as proud of what happened in the next 10 years as he started a family with Lori Raleigh, and in that part of his life came into being, as anything he did in the 60s and 70s. We forget about that it's so hard to get that part of your life together. and that's what Faithfully is about. I mean, it's
Well,
a, to keep all of that together,
and then
while
you look at
we're on the
Neil
road.
Sean and how many times has he been married? I mean, like it's and he's a road dog. He would play anywhere, anytime with anyone. So yeah, there's something to be said for, I'd like to have a quiet life for a few years.
Well, and people don't really think about it now, but back then you toured for 7 months and then you went into the studio. I
Yeah.
mean, there was no light in between one and the other. People put out albums once a year. And
Yeah.
so you went right back in and you were there. There might be a break for the holidays, and then come spring, you're in it again, and it was grueling. It was very grueling back then in a way that at least when you're off now, you can be off. There's not the expectation that you're going to put out another record right away. Um, you know, it's a it's understandable why he did what he did. And he eventually got the itch, and you sense that he comes back in the '90s with a storm. He does the Braxis Pool, part of the longest standing lineup of Ringo Starr's All Star Band.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is done sporadic solo stuff, but there's still a part of him that loves, his family and loves his family life. His son is a big part of his creative life. And that's really an outgrowth of him wanting just to be a family man. And, he strikes me as he has struck me for forever now as somebody that really wants that life balance in a way that other members of the band maybe don't necessarily crave. And so in that way, he's got a lot in common with Steve Perry. Steve Perry's the same way. He has to have long refractory periods where he's at home, and thankfully nowadays that works. You can
Yeah.
come out with an album every 3 or 4 or 5 years, without it taking away momentum, but it was a grind back then, and that was not
Yeah, the pace at which bands put albums out. I mean, the good thing is that as a fan, like, I got in Journey were one of the first sort of rock bands that I ever got into, but I never started buying their albums till like 88. And then
Mm.
you've got this rich catalog to go back and discover. But I will say this about Steve Perry, when he says no, he means it.
Yeah,
Like never, because most people eventually do the thing that everybody thinks they should do.
sure.
I was happy enough when he put out Traces. I thought, yeah, let's hear what he's got to say. When I listened to it, I really liked No Erasing. I thought that was pretty classic Steve
Yeah,
Perry journey pop rock. I would have liked to have a few more songs from like that, but knowing where he was coming from with this album, I
yeah.
I totally appreciated, what it was about.
Yeah, and I think for him, if you understand that part, then the record makes a lot of sense. I also think, to be honest, there's only so many, songs that he really feels he can carry off, like No Erasing or Sunshine's Gray. I mean, he's in a different place with his voice,
Yeah.
than he was back then, and that's why he doesn't want to tour, and that's why he's not putting out, he really was contemplating touring behind this record, and I think that factored into the kind of songs that he was, willing to put down. That didn't happen. But what we ended up with is a stripped down version of the record that came out a couple of years later. And what we go into in the book with Tom Flowers as co-producer is those were the arrangements for the tour that didn't happen. He wanted to
Oh,
do a
yeah,
strip.
yeah, yeah.
He wanted to do a stripped down tour that he could carry off with his voice as it is now. And if you listen to the stripped down versions on that record, that would have just been a delightful concert.
Yeah,
And
of
if they could
course.
rework the Journey songs in that way too, I
I was
think
going to say the problem is there is that makes a lot of sense, but there's no way he could go out without people wanting to hear the old stuff too.
I would be interesting to me to see if they could have reworked the Journey songs into something that he could have carried off in a longer tour. But I think ultimately, uh, I will say that he's not the perfectionist that he used to be, but I think that he still has that. within him. And it seems like the fear of not living up to expectations was a weight that was heavier than he could carry.
Well, plus you've got a lot of these guys that are the same age as Perry, but because they've never stopped, they've adjusted along the way. For someone like him to throw himself into that, go on the road for however long, 5, 6 months, it would be
Yeah.
quite a shock to the system. Getting back to Greg Raleigh, you reminded me, I was, and this is another one of those, the last few years, there's been so many lawsuits and legal entanglements. I was so excited when the Journey Through Time concert came out because, like I said, I'm such a fan. And to hear, I love the whole set list. I love how deep they went into those first three albums. But you got Dean Castronovo there. They're doing Daydream. They're doing Lady Luck.
That's nice.
It was amazing. It was amazingly good. Then I find out that, then you hear Greg Raleigh didn't give Neil permission to put it out. And I'm like, of course, why would it be smooth?
Yeah, I hope that they can figure, a way back to that because I found it delightful in the same way. I think that that stuff is still underrated and underheard, and that kind of setup where they can still bring in some of the later period stuff because Dean can handle those vocals.
He's
Uh,
amazing on the vocals. He does
really
such a,
has
and drumming at the same time.
It's kind of mind blowing. But yeah,
Yeah.
just they could bring in a lot of new people to that in a way where you wouldn't have the pressure of the Journey banner above it. And it seemed like the crowds at every one of those stops were just very into it. There is an audience for that. It's not, don't stop believing size audience, but there
Oh
is
no, the loudest.
a
When
diehard,
Dean starts singing "Trial by Fire,"
yeah.
you can hear like the excitement. Like I
Yeah,
can't
there's a
believe
there's a
it's.
diehard group there, and I think it could be expanded. So I really do hope that they find a pathway back. That has been resolved, the issue that was there, and my understanding is there's no hard feelings between them. So, and Neil has started talking about Journey Through Time again in his socials. So, maybe they're edging back into that direction. I hope so.
I would love to see a show like that. I've only seen Journey once. I've got my concert tee from I saw them. I saw them in 2015. They did a pretty extensive Canadian tour, and I actually was one of the shows with Omar Hakim, and
Okay.
it was great. It was really great, but wasn't terribly deep as far as
Yeah.
the set list. About as deep I was. They did Winds of March. I was a little surprised by that. And I remember Jonathan Cain would do, and he talks about this in the book about you know, the overflow of ballads. So when he does his piano solo,
Right. The
you hear
crowd
bits of the other songs.
burst.
Just a couple more questions for you, Nick. Was there any? I guess I'll give them to you both at once. Was there anything that you learned in doing this book that really surprised you that you weren't aware of, as far as the journey history goes? And was there anybody besides Herbie Herbert? Was there anybody that you really wanted to talk to and just weren't able to catch up with?
Well, I mean, Steve Perry, obviously, I mean, and I did try, but in that particular moment, he was coming off of both of the Traces projects, and he was as far into a cocoon as he could be. With someone like Steve, you catch him when he's working a project, or you really don't catch him at all. We talked to him at UCR during that period in which he was, promoting Traces, but it would have been nice to talk to him in this moment, where those records are far enough behind now that you can have kind of a perspective about Traces and how that went. It was sort of left to the book to figure that out. And, in talking to people around him who knew him, friends, collaborators. And, I think we got there on it, but it certainly would have been nice to have gotten some sense of perspective on that. And of course, Herbie Herbert is the brains behind this and the muscle. But more than that, there isn't a more forthright, brutally honest person who's ever been spoken to about Journey, and maybe no major band. I mean, the guy was the definition of straight shooter, and I'm certain he could have added still more wrinkles to it as we got further along. You know, the last major interview he gave was right when a lot of these lawsuits were breaking in the 2015, 2016, and I would like to have heard more from him about how that was his take on how that was resolved and the fact that they had gotten back together. I think that he would have been very happy to have heard that they were able to patch things up and find a way back to not just playing the songs, but friendship. He never
Yeah,
got
because they were playing the songs, but it was very much Neil's on this side of the stage and Jonathan's on
yeah,
this side of the
he
stage.
didn't get to see that, and I think there's a twinge of sadness, for me in that.
Yeah. Yeah, because like I said, these songs are so positive and up that, and it's, these are real people and real personalities. Um, so look, folks, if you're even casually into Journey, but you like a good rock read, I highly recommend Journey Worlds Apart, Nick DeRiso. Nick, thank you so much for talking to me about this. I mean, and thanks for the book. This was this was the book as a Journey fan that I needed to read. I just didn't know that it was coming out. Um, what have you got going on? Like, this is your time. What have you got? New books on the way, or like what's happening with you?
Well, right now, we're still in the moment with this one. Still kind of sketching out what I'm going to do next, but there will be something later this year from me. I hope to do a lot more with this one, though. There's some opportunities that I hope to do some more appearances with it and reach some more people about it because uh, there's still a lot of people who I think are going to enjoy this, and the more the word gets out, the more people are reaching me saying, wow, I didn't know this was here, and I certainly didn't know that somebody was working like this to tell this story in such a complete way, and there's a my feeling about this band and thinking to myself, there's never been a comprehensive book about this band, and maybe there's a hunger for it is confirmed by these interactions. I love hearing from fans who go, finally, the story of this band is told. And so, we're going to continue to have these conversations over the next weeks and months so we can make sure that as many people as possible know that this labor of love has come to fruition.
And just to give people a little bit of a preview of what they can expect in this book, this is not a Journey album cover. It was proposed for a major, major, major artist, but it was the inspiration behind the Journey artwork we all love. I had never seen this before. So that's just one more reason to get this book. And also, I love the history of this, the evolution, if you will, of the scarab. I
Yeah.
love the timeline you did for that. But yeah, so what's the easiest way people can get a hold of the book, Nick?
Well, it's available. All the editions are available on Amazon. There's an ebook version of it. There's a paperback version, and there's a deluxe fan version, a hardback version of it that's in color. But it is also available through the Target website, Books a Million, Barnes and Noble, all major booksellers. If you go to their website, you can search Journey Worlds Apart or Nick DeRiso, and you'll find it there.
Awesome. Favorite Journey album?
Favorite Journey album. That changes a lot, but I'm going to say Departure because I think it's overlooked, and the great songs on that, to me, tend to be the deep cuts right now. I think there's some really, really remarkable little nuggets that people don't know about in that early era. And when Steve and Raleigh were together, and I'm going to say that probably the most meaningful song of theirs right now to me, and the prettiest for sure, is Someday Soon from that record.
I thought you were going to say People and Places because I really like that one. And
I do
Precious.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a raw sounding album for them too. It's not quite as produced. Mine's always been Frontiers, but yeah. All right, Nick, thank you so much for doing this. Best of luck with the book, folks. Journey Worlds Apart. Go get it, read it, enjoy it. Thanks everybody for watching this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. We will see you all later.